Microsoft CEO Satya recently did a bunch of interviews or people responding to his announcement or his thoughts about how SaaS is dead and it'll be replaced mainly by AI agents. And I'm actually in the process of converting a business company that mainly has desktop applications to SaaS. And they have been trying this for the last 6 years, and there was a struggle, and they hired me to do the conversion or in the process of conversion, which I've done successfully in a previous company. And that was actually spurred on by COVID, where desktop applications distribution of desktop applications was pretty difficult when people all worked at home, as in the IT guy had to install it, ship it, their physical laptops, etc. And it's not like they could just download it and install it because of, there's some security things that they have to go through. And you think about it, like it is a big barrier when it comes to security and their cautiousness of SaaS-based software because it goes through the internet. One of the many reasons why these companies stay in desktop or are so profitable in just desktop applications is mainly because a good chunk of these industries rely on security, and desktop has all the data within the software and within the laptop, doesn't leave and doesn't go on the internet or even the intranet. So I'm curious as to how his announcement, coming from someone who provides enterprise software, right, will affect people. In a way, if you think about it, Office 365 still has its native desktop form. Like, it's not gone completely. It's still there. And my colleagues are still opening up desktop app, even though it's like pretty much on par. I mean, it has feature parity with the online counterparts. Yeah, they still like desktop. And so I have a feeling it's going to be a while before they will adopt something like AI agents going into multiple applications. Yeah, go on.
There's probably a lot to unpack over there, right? One,
Of course.
Satya Nadella's statement, and then the whole world of desktop versus SaaS as well, and now SaaS versus agentic is also quite nuanced, I think. And then you have this whole thing of what Satya Nadella tried to say over there, right? So maybe a little bit of background of why desktop apps became a thing even before SaaS became a thing, right?
Go on.
So historically, like, the web was not a powerful medium. Your internet speeds were much smaller. The internet itself came much later, so it came in 90s, way after desktop apps were a thing. So the easiest way to basically ship software was through a floppy, or you download it on the web and then you install it on your computer. Because your computer was way more powerful than the browser running on your computer. That changed. Fast forward to the new web frameworks that emerged, the new generations of HTML5, CSS3, the whole canvas principle. All that created massive changes in the web ecosystem almost every 5 years. And then the last big one was the web runtimes, where you could almost treat your browser as an operating system and build for the browser.
Yep.
And the browser would give you primitives into your GPU, into your CPU. And one of those major frameworks was the WASM framework, the Web Assembly Framework. What this allowed you to do was to build for a couple of browsers, and mostly a majority of them just follow standards. So if you're building for Chrome and Firefox and the others, you just have to build using the major standards and then some special tweaks based on each browser. And that just like normalized the whole release and deployment field. So you could build quite easily for the web, which was like one target build, essentially. And that could be distributed into everyone's computers. So this whole distribution channel massively changed over the second half of the 2010s. And that's what, in my opinion, gave this whole SaaS arena a nice boost. So both UI-facing apps, but also like server-side apps, both of them became a thing because you're just building for the web everywhere.
So, yeah, so the process of having things computed or sorted out by the server rather than their own machines was a big thing.
That was a big thing. So there was a transition, right? So first you wanted to get into the gateway of the browser. So get people comfortable using the browser, and maybe the browser computes things locally on your computer, but using the browser for things. And
Mm,
then that just slowly shifted more activity on the server side because it was more efficient to compute.
mm,
Where when you compute, you have the economy of scale when you start computing things on the server side, and you
mm,
can assure a certain kind of experience. And simultaneously, you had all these other trends pop up, which was social media with Facebook and everything. People were comfortable storing their data elsewhere.
mm.
You had Google, you had Gmail. So people didn't necessarily start storing all their email on their computer like
Jeez.
like my does still. He syncs Outlook into his computer and deletes his Outlook email every single time.
He doesn't like it on the server, is that why?
He doesn't like to keep it on the server. He just feels it's safer on the computer, and he takes a couple of backups of his.
He backs up his emails on a
Yeah,
physical hard drive.
on a
Okay.
couple of physical hard drives. So he has a couple of replicas of his historical email stuff. But
Yep.
this is for historical reasons, right? Because basically you just had like a 2 MB email inbox in the late 90s. So
Yep.
the only way you could store your historical emails was on device.
Yep. This is the thing. The people like your dad, they are in high positions now in industries like oil and gas and energy, like the where I work in, or old school government. They're the ones who still retain this attitude, and they're happy with desktop applications, just like he's using Outlook. And you give them something that comes externally, right, on a constant basis. Their first question is how often, what happens if you lose connection or the server drops, right?
Mhm.
And even though we say stats like it's up 99.99% of the time, they're like, what's your contingency plan for the 0.1% chance? Right. Like what
I mean,
happens if it
things are
goes
way
down?
more complex. So
Yeah.
web simplifies the distribution channel,
Yeah, of course.
but it creates complexities elsewhere, right? Your network security now, a certain network vigilance has to be maintained by the servers, essentially, and the
Yep.
security has to be up to the mark. And then you have the network uptime, as you mentioned. And then there are even more interesting principles. I believe Office does this. So if your connection drops, your word editor will not stop working. It'll continue to work. It'll just stop syncing. And you can continue using the word editor, create a couple of pages. And then when your connection comes back, it'll sync the latest state. And that happens by balancing what part of that SaaS application actually runs locally on your browser and what part actually runs remotely on a web server. But I
Yep.
think parallelly, one big movement that happened was the subscription based model, right? So this is
Yep.
where I think these two things get conflated. One was the SaaS model, and then there's the subscription model, which was a way to monetize SaaS apps. And there was a big shift. And I think Microsoft kind of spearheaded that shift. It wasn't the first, but the heaviest thing that moved it
Mm,
was Office. Office,
mm.
right after Satya Nadella came, I think 2014, 2015, shifted to a completely subscription-based model where you pay whatever, $10 a month,
Yep.
and you get a pretty nice subscription with Office.
Yep. Yep. It's not just them. The Adobe, right,
Yeah.
did it, and it's probably has a lot to do with the fact that all that computational power is no longer done by a computer, but by their servers, and that has a cost, consumption cost, and so hence subscription.
And they
Have to
make
be.
more money this way.
Yeah.
This is because basically you're not going to be using your Office suite all the time. And even if you are, it's still making a profit.
Yeah. Well, it's more like it's literally a recurring revenue for them versus a single perpetual purchase, which you got to wait for the person to say, okay, I think I need this upgrade. Whereas subscription, they just get upgraded no matter what because it gets upgraded automatically in the background.
And it simplifies a lot of things, right? Now you don't have to really worry about license checks and stuff because basically you got a
Authentication.
card on file.
Yeah. And you say it's simplified, and it is from an IT perspective, but it's also, does a person actually value these subscriptions? Like, do they value these upgrades? As you say, they just use it once in a while, right? If a
Mm-hmm.
feature is okay, then they might not want to do that. So yeah, I'm getting that sort of pushback where we say, okay, this is, you don't have to host, the network anymore because this is local. We do network licenses and it's localized to their intranet, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the selling point is they don't have to manage it anymore. And they're like, no, we actually prefer managing it because we have the full control of security, full control of, its runtime, and they want to be in control of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's that other mentality. I'm just talking about, this is people who deal with finances. I mean, in the fintech industry, energy, this probably explains a lot why governments, why they're so slow when it comes to change because of that. They just want reliability. They value that much more so than upgrades and
And control,
changes.
right?
Yeah, control.
They
Yeah,
want
control.
they want things to be in their hands
The
rather
point,
than.
yeah, the point of control is to ensure reliability. Or they actually, maybe control is the hierarchy. Like they want to feel that they're the ones who are responsible.
Yeah, and quite likely, like if it's not, like let's say you're not selling this to an IT company, you're selling this piece of software to some other company. Quite likely, their IT is not going to be as good as your IT. So, so
Good?
it's
What do
not
you
a,
mean? At an
l-
intellectual skill level?
no. I mean like uptime. Let's say. So if you say 99.99% uptime, it's highly unlikely that an internal smaller team can maintain the same amount of uptime or the same amount of security even. However, it comes down to control at the end of the day. So like when the whole company's power shuts down, their servers shut down, and that's something they can reason with rather than the service going down
And
elsewhere in the
yeah,
world.
where they're still running. Okay. Yeah, some external shutdown.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not often like fully explained by whatever knowledge they have,
Mm.
and they have to depend on another entity to
Yep.
provide that knowledge.
Yep.
So that's the big transition, right? But I also see SaaS companies do these three tier kind of subscriptions. You often have like whatever starter pack or free pack, and then you have a pro pack, which is like okay, really
Yep.
nice, and then maybe a team tier, which is for multiple people with user based authentication, etc. And then you have, quite often I see in these kind of sensitive things, you have a fourth layer, which is like, hey, this is my enterprise tier, where I'll deploy the server within your tenant. They call it the cloud tenant.
Mm.
And I'll just simply have a small authentication service that service would have to ping each time it's alive. And that's about it. So the control layer kind of stays on the SaaS side of things on the open internet, but the actual deployments stay within the network of the target client.
Mm.
And that way, all the interactions to that server happen only within their network. And a small amount of data, which is, it could be usage analytics, and it could be basically, hey, do I have the right amount of licenses, or are these licenses rightly distributed?
Mm.
Only that interaction happens over the public internet. So I think there's a way for SaaS to even respect, let's say, network security and network controls, right?
Yep.
But often the last tier, which is the enterprise tier, is quite complicated and requires a lot of hand holding during deployment. So I worked with a company which I was trying to deploy their tooling within my ecosystem, and 99% of the services get deployed in a one-click fashion. And for the last 1%, it kind of, you have to understand your network nuances. You have to understand whether the company is an AWS company or a GCP company, and all these intricacies come into play.
Yep. You brought up an interesting thing about usage analytics, and what you're saying is you're offering IT tools of transparency, and so they give that sort of viewpoint, gives them the sense of control. Um,
Wait, when,
so
when I said usage analytics, I meant like telemetry data. Like, for example, the server's gone down 100 times.
yep,
Here are the logs. Stream
yep,
it back to the server
yep,
so you can
yep.
push an update and stuff like that.
Yep. Connection times, etc. And we definitely rely on that. And so when it does go down, our DevOps, etc., would be alerted, etc. And so we have somewhat of control to stop it or investigate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
So
there's God.
yeah, I was go on. I'm kind of like pushing you along to get to the future, the present now.
Before going to the present, right? Still sticking on the historical side of things. There was so the way I look at the boom, the SaaS boom, let's say of the 2010s, was similar to the SEO boom.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at it, let's talk about the SEO world slightly, right? So people were building websites without too much attention to the search engines that were driving them. In the early 2000s, the search engines were really good. Google was doing a great job, and it was able to figure out which website you wanted to go to based on your search request. And then people figured out ways to gamify this, and that was the birth of the whole arena of SEO, right? Search engine optimization.
Yep.
How can I rank my page higher than someone else's page?
Yep.
Even though, let's say, my service is not as good. So that boom happened, and now we are in a world where you have the new generation of search engines. Google, you powered by Gemini, likewise OpenAI doing search as well, Perplexity doing a similar kind of thing. And then this new age, again, it's going back to the original thing, which is like, hey, you can't really game this too easily because I'm looking at the content of your website, I'm looking at how many other people are linking to you, and based on that, I'm going to give you the information, right? I think there's a similar kind of path that SaaS businesses followed. During this subscription boom, basically, you found a lot of SaaS entities emerge for very frivolous things. When I say frivolous, it could be a service that is just removing backgrounds from images. It could be a service that is just transcribing speech into text. It could be another service that takes text and pronounces it in a robotic speech. These frivolous services, I call them frivolous because they do one thing, they do it really well. Perhaps if someone had access to Photoshop or better tooling, they could do a better job themselves. However, these SaaS businesses had their place, right? So let's say let's say you're using an identification website and you're uploading your photo. That photo that you upload needs its background removed, and you could send, so that server could basically send it to this other background removal server and then bring out your photo without a background.
Mm-hmm.
So it had this space in the economy of things, where a lot of these SaaS businesses were also B2B. So they would be used as a tool that another tool would use or another service would use. Right now, for example, in the ecosystem that I work in, we use a lot of these tooling. We use tools to clean audio, we use tools to do other things. And what we are seeing is this, again, agentic kind of burst into it. But before we come to the agentic burst, it just feels to me that basically the tooling that these SaaS businesses exposed kind of became like too simple as the tools evolved. And when I say that, I just mean like now LLMs or AI is a powerful tool that you could use for a multitude of tasks. And do you still require a specific service to remove a background, or could you just prompt an LLM in a certain way to do that for you? So the horizontal nature or the application of these tools have started growing, which means that specific tools that do specific things have started reducing.
Yep. So the tooling aspect is great because the AI is capable of picking on those skills, and there are plenty of things that are proprietary that AI cannot take over of, and so I guess that's the moat that it will constantly. Well, the good thing is there's the hybrid situation where the AI depends on an API, and it still rely on all the SaaS tooling that enables that. So things like when I say proprietary, like right now, what we have are mathematical models that are generated from experiments. And these are things that AI could potentially not predict, like the randomness of the physical environment that because we do explosion tests and things like that. I mean, physics can be mathematically calculated, and so perhaps AI can figure that out, but there are so many variables. And so that's what we have as our proprietary data, and that we don't, create something that's so public. We hide that. So AI will never see that unless there's millions of people running it, and probably AI will figure it out. When there's enough data points to just, here's a cluster of patterns that we could just pick off from, and we don't have to have the exact accuracy. But so I'm just saying, I'm just diving into areas where it still holds its ground, where APIs could still potentially be still there for AI to feed on.
100%, 100%. And I think this is where we got to unpack a little bit of what Satya Nadella says. And I think I partially think what he said is actually wrong. And so I think when he was referring to SaaS, he was referring to this single tool kind of SaaS businesses. And that's more and more being consumed by a one-size-fits-all kind of approach, which is the LLM. But it's not referring to the SaaS business model per se, in my opinion, because there are still a lot of services that provide value, and I don't see them being consumed by AI anytime soon. And you can take something just talk about Satya Nadella, Microsoft Office 365 is not going to be taken over by an agentic approach anytime soon. It might be assisted, aided, helped with an agentic approach, but it's not going away anytime soon. And so is my video editor, or this particular application that we are recording our podcast on. I pay $20 a month for this, and this is not going away anytime soon. It's only going to get better. It's going to use a lot of AI features, agentic features, but I don't see this running away. Yeah.
Well, he is saying that AI will call upon these tools, but at I think the singular point that he wanted to make was that these agents can access multiple applications. So these applications itself, you will have access to, and you could still manually do them, manipulate it. These agents can be used as, a single point where you could just rely on it. So one of the interesting aspects of...
Actually, I would... Sorry to interrupt you over there, but just one thing I need to say is so the agents can use tools already. The agents can call upon tools to perform larger tasks. And it could be, let's say, hey, do this research about the economy of Somalia and give me some super useful information about their prospective GDP next quarter, right? Let's say I post a question like that. Maybe it pings the World Bank data, maybe it pings the CIA fact book, maybe it pings a lot of these other services that can be available as tools. And then it does its research and gives me something. So in this approach, I do see an agentic platform basically taking a step above the SaaS platform.
Mm-hmm.
But talk about something like gaming, right? Let's say I have an Xbox and I have an Xbox subscription for their gaming stuff, which gives me access to their unlimited gaming library. I don't see that going away anytime soon. I'm a human who wants to have fun. I'm not going to replace that with an agentic approach, because the experience I'm getting is of having the fun. I'm not going to offload that into AI. So that's where I think, so there are certain tasks that you would do, whether it's gaming or whether it's writing an email, that you would still want to do that, even in an agentic world. And those SaaS things will continue to be available.
So I'm trying to get your definition of agentic. Are you saying that the agent can create, he's potentially saying the agent can actually create a whole game for you, as opposed to you going into a game portal and with a library of catalog of games, and hence AI unlikely will replace that, because you don't want your catalog. You don't imagine an agent can replace a catalog of games.
Even then, the agentic approach, even in that world, the agentic system that creates a game for me, I would require to have a subscription with that SaaS. So the way I'm looking at it, there are services that would be required by me, and they could be sprinkled with a lot of AI or a little bit of AI. But that SaaS stream of money, I don't see that going away anytime soon. And the whole agentic thing is also like questionable, right? So I can have a game made for me, or I can have a game that is distributed by tastemakers. This is the difference of Netflix and Apple TV, right? Apple TV has a few titles, but they're very tastefully selected. And Netflix has millions or if not billions of titles, which are like recommended based on a recommendation system.
Yeah.
So it's again down to taste at the end of it. But that is slightly a different thing from what we're discussing, which is this SaaS entry point. I don't see it going away anytime soon.
Okay. Yeah. So what you described there is a it's proprietary, right? Or the creativity is proprietary. Like you can't imagine AI just creating something like that. And as in the whole film, and also the curation was done by a person or, versus a machine. You just literally compared the two. And you're saying that the Apple TV, the human curated one, is more tasteful than the machine curation. And so it's hard for the AI to take that away.
No, I think AI
Is
will
that what you're
get
saying?
there, but AI will get there in terms of taste. But what I'm saying is that it comes to personal preference, and there's always going to be a certain group of the population that enjoys like centralized taste making, and a certain group of the population that enjoys like personalized taste making.
Yep.
And whether it's the same group, like it could also be the same person at different points of time that enjoys these two things differently. So
Okay. Let's dig on this point, because I'm just thinking every time you say something like personalization, etc., an AI can do that, right? It can figure your taste and curate, let's say, a selection of films across multiple platforms, streaming platforms, right? And he's like, here's your catalog based on your taste, and it's from Amazon, Netflix, Apple TV, Disney, and so it becomes its own entry point to entry points. Is that
yeah,
yeah?
100%. And that's why I say like AI will get there, right? And it comes
Yep.
down to personal preference at the end of the day. And I do believe that there's always going to be a case for some kind of centralized taste making, especially because most of discovery happens in that phase. Like when I'm discovering new music, it's happening not because I'm just sent into a path that I like. Instead, I'm exposed to things that I didn't know I liked. And
Yeah.
maybe AI gets good in that as well, And I don't see any limitation for AI to not get good in that. But there's always going to be, hey, this is what my friend told me about. I'm going to check it out kind of scenario.
Okay. One thought I'm just thinking about when you say centralized, right? Immediately thought like corporate. Immediately think that's Microsoft or just all of corporate aspects. When they have many groups of things, they just want to centralize everything so that they could save money, which is a false thing, actually, because if you centralize too many different things, that centralization gets messy, or has to average things out. It's the law of averaging, which is kind of what you're saying. Like, this is centralized. It's not really catered to your niche taste, and it's not personalized, and it's because it's averaged. Right. And some people don't like that. Some people do. And so I wonder, this movement, this direction is part of his, corporate mentality. It's not just necessarily them, like even our company, we have like centralized UX. Like a lot of, telecoms, I know I have a friend who worked in telecoms, their UX is centralized, meaning that every team will depend on the single thing, right? The single department UX. And they act like an agency, basically. Literally, we call AI agents. These agencies, and the problem is that they don't understand the niche things that each individual business areas needs, or each individual customer, they have different personas need. So, yeah, imagine you're the UX department having for a telecommunication where you one day have to work on a website that sells like mobile phones, and then the other is like you work on an OS of a mobile phone itself. They're completely different, and all this context switching is not good for a person. Sure, they work on these projects like months at a time, but you're switching missions all the time, and so there's a lack of consistency, and that's what I see. The other aspect is people love specialized tools. Like, corporate will always constantly push for a single platform, like the one platform that does everything. Like, Google tried to do that, but at best, the best they could do is have a single, login for everything, and pretty much that's it. They tried to change all the icons to all look the same, your Gmail and, Docs and all. There was one time they did that, and everyone's like, no, I don't see the specialism in that, and I need these tools to, do its own thing, keeping it focused. And if your tool, even though it's centralized, it's not good enough, it's averaged out, they will go for a better tool that they don't care for the simplified login or the consistency of the look and feel. They would want something really good. And so they could forego the centralization. That's the argument that I always give to companies where they emphasize on cost saving of centralization. And then I say, that's against customer centricity. It's like, which one are you for?
True. I completely agree with you. It might seem slightly against what I was saying before, but there's a different, again, it comes down to, so when I say central, when I was talking about central taste making, that was slightly in a different context from a centralization of resources or centralization of operations. And I completely agree with you when it comes to centralization of resources or operations, where there's a place for that. You can centralize things like, hey, everyone in my company needs to use Windows. And therefore, there's a central IT team that manages the security of the entire internal network, let's say. I think that is worth centralizing. On the other hand, if you're a large company that's building a bunch of applications and you say that, hey, there's a central UX team that you have to borrow resources from, or a central AI team that you got to borrow resources from, that makes things unnecessarily cumbersome. And also, you're treating internal teams as agencies, as you mentioned. But actually, that provides a very nice parallel to what's happening in the AI world as well, right? And now you have these centralized tools, which are the LLMs, the ChatGPTs, that can do a lot of things: remove background from images, make text into speech, make speech into text, but not necessarily do them reliably well every single time. And they come with a certain amount of, let's say, accuracy or error rate as you execute a lot of queries with them. And maybe the error rate goes down over time, but the reason I'm bringing that up is so the way I look at tools like these, foundational tools like these, they're horizontal in nature to the markets they affect. And there's always going to be, in my opinion, this need for verticalization. I don't know the right word for this, but if a company does speech to text, you can use ChatGPT or you can use DeepGram, which DeepGram does one thing and one thing extremely well, which is speech to text. It uses sometimes the same technologies as OpenAI uses underneath, but it also improves upon those. And I really believe that, there's always going to be a place for companies that are specializing in a certain vertical, because they're able to iterate with their customer in a far more superior way. And that's why, again, I don't think SaaS is dead, right? Because there is going to be this need to take this general stuff and hone it in for a specific vertical. And that's where you can see value being created. And that's where you can see margins being created.
Yes. It's down to the person who thinks that you could make this into a horizontal product and never go vertical. And you're saying, this is the verticals where they make the money. And as I say, people want specialist, good tools rather than average tools, like the ones you're saying. Wide, they don't want to go wide, they want to go focused. That's because the focused one will definitely beat the wide one, the horizontal ones. Yeah.
And this changes over time as well, right? So as each generation of LLM comes out, certain tasks get consumed by the LLM. And it's similar to how, let's say, Apple did a lot of things, right? I'm not going into the details, but things that were done by third parties now are done by centralized services like Gmail, like Google, by Apple, etc. Whether this is cloud storage, whether this is transcription on your phone, etc. And I think that's a similar kind of way that this arena will evolve. These foundational tools will get better at everything. And that means certain specific domain-specific tasks that happen today by special companies will get consumed by this larger foundational model as the error rates come down in that specific task, which means there's more scope for that company that was doing that specific task to do more, or to enter into that value chain of the customer deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think, so that vertical company will stay on that vertical, but just take a larger role on that vertical while these LLMs keep getting better.
Yep, until it catches up to the vertical.
Yeah,
And
and then the
that,
nature of the vertical then
yep,
changes, right?
yep, they would focus on other things
On more. Like you got
or
to
more
solve,
things.
find out who your customer is and solve more problems for that customer.
Okay. So it's just the nature of how products are built. There's always nuances that people want different things. It's not standardized yet. And so until they get there, it can't be commoditized. What I mean by like that is as in it's like it's seamless, that's when it's commoditized. And then when the margins are very little at that point, because everyone's doing it, everyone is just the standards, they would then have to, move on to something else that people would find more valuable. All right, that's a very solid point. I definitely took away that.
Yeah, so
So
like
go on.
going back to the SaaS ecosystem, right? So we say basically one tool to do one job. And a lot of that comes from like the Unix philosophy, right? Where
Unix,
like,
did you just say?
from the 1970s. So the big difference between like the Unix and the Windows way of working was Unix was basically a collection of tools. You had one tool that would navigate your directories and it would do it amazingly well. You didn't need to push an update to that tool for ages and ages and ages. Likewise, one tool to connect to another computer and it would do it amazingly well. And then the operating system basically shipped all these tools that users could use the way they wanted to use. And um, this basically the SaaS ecosystem. You had tools to do a certain task, maybe collect telemetry, and that tool, all it did was collect telemetry really well. Maybe there was a tool to basically get some analytics data, and all it did was get analytics data really well. That world might change now with an agentic kind of orchestrator sitting in between, wherein the LLMs would get better on the bottom, where these tools now get consumed by a single tool where you send an LLM. It's prompt as a SaaS. That's the way I look at it. Every fixed prompt that your company uses is the equivalent of what a SaaS would have been before. Mm-hmm. So, for example, right now we use a prompt to GPT-4 to translate a bunch of stuff. Whereas before we would ping the Google Translate API, or we would have pinged another API that was specialized in translation. And all that goes into our customization is the prompt. And the prompt itself acts as what a SaaS would have acted before. So I think this is where things are going, which means that, hey, now I don't need to contact that company for translation. Instead, I can do more. I can do translation plus transcription. Okay, my value lies in the transcription. Okay, so let me hone that in.
Yep. One of the things that you've mentioned, it's very focused on prompting and versus like pinging something, like as in clicking on an application. What I found in user research, interviewing people on their impressions of, because we made an AI assistant version of our product, and overall they didn't like it because they don't want to type everything out. Because they already have the clicks that you have built-in logic already, where it's set in a certain way where you just click and it does those specific things. Whereas you need to actually type out that logic into it, to behave just like the click. And so they said the time I write those 2 sentences, I would have made like at least 10 clicks that I needed, or something like that, and would gotten the results. And this is in the case of speed, right? For a small task. So that's where it loses. But where it wins is when it has to do lots of macro tasks, right? Where it might take more than several clicks or pull in several applications. So that's the painful bit, from going from one SaaS application to another, because you have to do some sort of integration or migration. Like integration is painful, or you have to migrate one result to another result as an input to another application. That's potentially painful, where the prompt could potentially handle that. And so it's worth writing that statement. And that's what I noticed. And that's why I feel like when I see the future hackathons, when they make us AI for a single application, that's where it just dies quite quickly, because people can just click through what they need within that small application. Whereas, I think going back to Microsoft CEO's point of view, it's like the single AI layer that can reach to multiple applications and hopefully can handle the integration well, can take the answer from one SaaS product to another SaaS product and have it turn out the ultimate answer.
Yeah. Actually, I was thinking about this this morning while I was having a coffee. How best to construct a SaaS application or a SaaS business, basically, to be somewhat future-proof or integrate AI as easy as possible as AI is getting better. And underneath, I came down to simple. So simplicity matters is what I think, in the sense that traditional standards on building your API or building your server-side application as tools still hold. So as long as you can build things quite functionally well and isolated from each other, following best practices in coding and API design, then your UI, which is your SaaS application, is just a layer that sits on top of all these other tools that it calls. And you can sprinkle as much agentic magic on top of that as you want, because the agent shouldn't have any difficulty calling these functionally simple APIs as long as they're quite self-descriptive on what they do. And they're able to execute a particular task really well. And then what you end up in is a scenario where you have one layer, a user-facing layer, which is web-based potentially, and then you have another user-facing layer, which is agentic, and then maybe you have an interface for the agent to communicate with the user. And a combination of these two is, I believe, the way to go forward in this given ecosystem, where the agentic approach cannot fully replace anything at the moment, but it can partially replace a lot of things. Especially any kind of workflow that has a lot of and statements. Hey, get me this and that, and where my user is less than 40 years old, and where this is demographic is in India, and where the servers are kind of slow, and where he has waited a long time to calculate something. I think wherever you have a lot of these and statements, they typically require a lot of clicks on a web interface. Instead, as you mentioned, like an agentic approach comes in strong over there and is able to fetch a lot of this in a single shot way, let's say. And consolidate a lot of this information and give the user exactly what the user needs. It could be as simple as, I'm building this Figma application. I need to look up the SEC regulations, and I need to look up let's say I'm creating a banking app. I want to look up the SEC regulations, and I want to look at the UK regulations and Indian regulations and figure out which is the first thing that I need to act upon. And I can just ask AI that today to give me the answer. So I think here is where some agentic approach actually adds magic to it. But this all depends on the SEC regulations being provided in a simple way, ideally through a simple API. But that's the SaaS layer that needs to exist in front of and behind this whole agentic approach, in my opinion.
Yep. Definitely needs to be simple and descriptive for easy access by the AI agent. And, you just gave me another thought about the and function. And I think there will be a time where the assistant would actually read the context of your browser. And now it's like a separate window completely. And you have to type it in, and you got to paint the context of what you're seeing.
No, it already can. I've already seen a bunch of frameworks that integrate with your browser stack.
So it understands all your tabs that are open.
Yeah, not your tabs. It understands everything within a particular tab.
Yeah. You know how some browsers, they have a billion tabs because they are pulling information from everywhere. Those are your and statements, right? And if it understands that context, they don't have to write and anymore, which is, typing and versus clicking on something. Sometimes clicking can be faster, right? If the clicking logic is to evaluate all these databases.
And especially if you have muscle memory, right?
Yeah, if you have if it's something that you do all the time, and this is a game of optimization. It is in a way kind of like, people who write SQL queries, like pulling in from different databases. It's people who are used to that would probably be happy with the prompting, but those who are used to like GUIs that are very well designed that could handle all these things, and they could pull an answer from that. Yeah, clicking will win in that sense. But if it could read the context of your browser, then yeah, it would eliminate all the end functions. It's just like, right, could you analyze all the stats in these particular tabs based on where it's located in that page? And so that, in that single statement, you could combine everything without the and, this and that and this.
Yeah, just to look at it from a different lens, I think Google launched something last month where it included browser automation within Chrome. And you could basically ask Chrome a complex question or give it a complex task, and it would open particular tabs, read through the tabs, go to particular links, actually get you what you want, And it could be something like, hey, I'm planning this trip to Morocco and these are my rough itineraries. Can you see whether this itinerary fits into my holiday schedule and book tickets accordingly? And it could look into your calendar, it could look at your holiday schedule, and then take that information, look for tickets, take that information, look for the cheapest tickets, take it to the website, navigate all the way through till you get to the payment thing, and then just ask for your confirmation right at the end. And I think these kind of complex workflows at a browser level, I think that's the next way things are going.
So you brought up an interesting point because we were talking about verticals here, right? And human curation, where this is where the AI controls everything. And then you would want to particularly say, I want to look at a very specific place where they book, travel. And so you would have that tab up, for example, and then say, look into that specific thing, not anywhere else. Or, that aspect of control and that human curation is probably more palatable than blindly let the AI do everything.
Yeah, so the way I think about this is interruptible and transparent agentic workflows. So you should be able to get in at any point of time and change the direction which the agentic approach is taking. So let's say it's going to Skyscanner, and let's say I have a discount code with Expedia instead. I want to put Expedia on that list as well, and then see whether with my discount code it's actually cheaper than Skyscanner. And these are things that I want to, I think will create value. The ability to pause an agentic workflow, do my little investigation, come back with my results, and feed it back into the agentic workflow so that I can still get the downstream impact out of it, and making sure it's transparent along the way. So I know exactly, hey, I'm going to Expedia to look for flight tickets, and then these are the flight tickets I found, so that I can fully understand at any point where I want to interrupt.
Yep. I just realized, SaaS is not dead. It won't die. Because what you just said is pretty much APIs that go to these specialized databases, and there's no way they would merge this database with another database because they're proprietary, they're different companies, etc. Right? So AI is just a layer over SaaS.
This is where the complexity comes in, right? Or this is where, let's say, the resistance comes in my opinion, because a lot of these SaaS companies have created stickiness based on their application. And a lot of that stickiness comes from control over the user experience or the user interface. And take a simple example such as Uber. Uber has been able to package Uber Eats, does Uber, but let's say I have a meta application or a phone level application that looks at Bolt and Uber at the same time. Now, Uber then just gets reduced into an API SaaS. It cannot have the kind of margins as it has as treating you as a loyal customer, because at no point will you be loyal if you have an agentic approach behind it, And this is where I think you will see resistance in certain companies just relegating themselves as just another API tool in the market, because this would just
Mm.
put their place way lower than what it is right now. It's
Mm.
better for the consumer, though, in my opinion.
Okay, which is better? You're saying the agentic approach or the current approach?
The agentic approach, because it normalizes the playing field all of a
Mm.
sudden, and you can't monopolize this. I mean, you can still monopolize the system, and you can do the same things outside the agentic approach to make sure that the agent always picks you because you're always cheaper. But coming back to the Uber example, like let's say I want to order some pizza right now, and if I
Hmm.
have a way of checking the Domino's website and the Uber Eats website and the Deliveroo website and
Yep.
XYZ website, and I get my cheapest deal, which is a balance of cost but also time to delivery. I think that just means that every time I want a pizza, I'm not going to go to Uber Eats. Instead,
Yeah.
I'm just going to go to
Yep.
all three websites, compare, and then contrast.
Now, if you work for such a company like Uber Eats, do you then become defeated and deflated when you end up losing that sort of control?
So my understanding is these kind of companies will resist that change, right?
Mm, they will resist. Yeah. So I'm curious as to, have you witnessed any sort of resistance before, or what do you think are tactics to defend themselves from such a situation?
You do see that slightly, right? Let's say I open Google Maps in London and I want to go from point A to point B. I see a couple of services show up in my cabs tab. I see Bolt show up. I see Sixth show up, and I see Get or Free Now show up.
Yeah.
I do not see Uber show up. Uber used to show up, I think, 2 years before or 3 years before. Uber doesn't
Mm-hmm.
show up anymore. And this is the kind of resistance. Like they don't want to be put in the same bucket as these other tools.
Yeah.
Instead, they want their own playing field decision.
Mm.
So I think any kind of revenue that they would be getting through Google Maps, they're losing on, but they found out that that's probably okay for them, because people who end up just Ubering things, they just directly go into the Uber app and just not go into Google Maps.
Yep.
And I think this is where this is one example of that stickiness. It's not the agentic world, but it is a similar kind of world which is trying to aggregate multiple services under one platform.
Yep.
So services like Uber is a great example, because you can see it resisting even in the old world. It'll continue to resist in the new world. I think their main thing is going to be how to make a customer loyal such that they will not use an agentic approach or a prompt to solve this problem. Instead, they'll just directly go into my app, which is one tool does it really well.
Mm-hmm.
So I
So,
think basically their offering would have to get better than the competition to maintain that kind of stickiness.
yep. And either the operation or better experience or better branding is what would differentiate.
And I believe it's going to be this kind of subscription model, like the Uber One subscription model that
Yep.
combines multiple tools such that you get certain discounts as long as you use that ecosystem.
Again, stickiness
Yes.
is what holds their ground.
But ecosystem as
Loyalty.
well, like the value of transferring your subscription from a delivery service to like a cab service is quite useful. I
Mm-hmm.
found that useful for me as well.
Mm. So yeah, that's the whole point. You have a single Uber app that does, both food and, taxi, and it's quite seamless on that front, and you stay within their environment, and suddenly you just find yourself clicking on that app more than anything else.
Yeah, and the cool thing is like if I go to the US, I can use the same subscription, and I think this
Yep.
is useful from that perspective. Now, sure, they're going to lose against this aggregated platform when there's a new customer that they haven't acquired yet. And I believe this is a loss that they're willing to take for
New
this.
customer that they haven't acquired yet, as in just anyone new, like when they have the choice of either going to the Uber environment or Google Maps to pick off a cab.
Yes. And someone who does not have an Uber One subscription will see no benefit in sticking to a single ecosystem and just
Mm.
choose whatever is best at that given point of time.
Well,
So
that comes down to the onboarding team to optimize that, to our acquisition team. And their biggest competitor is not Sixth or any other cab, it's Google Maps
So
as
this
the
is
entry
quite
point.
true, and this is quite what you're saying is right. But I also believe there's a little bit of counterintuitive nature to it. So they're happy for Google Maps to make the user familiar with cabs and stuff. And as the user is consistently taking cabs, the user will decide, hey, I need to optimize my spend on cabs. And this is how I've ended up with an Uber One. I don't use cabs, but I use a lot of food delivery.
Mm-hmm.
And once I do a lot of these food delivery things, I realize, hey, I got to optimize my spend. So while Google Maps or XYZ was in charge of the customer acquisition, they seamlessly got that customer the moment the customer was willing to spend X amount of dollars. In a way, this is where I think Uber also is quite intelligent. They're like, oh, yeah, I'm going to forego that initial burden of like onboarding knowledge to a customer and let third parties handle that. And the moment the customer wants to see value, he's naturally going to come to me. And I think this is quite a smart approach, to be honest.
So, okay, I didn't quite catch the bit of how they managed to get, let's say, someone who's so used to Google Maps, right, to be onboarded to Uber. How did they make that jump to see the value of Uber for a new customer?
So this is it, right? Let's say I'm going to work every day. And every day I open up Google Maps and let's hypothetically say I cycle to work, but let's say I'm taking a cab to work every morning. I open Google Maps. Over there, I see three options. I choose whatever is cheaper at a given point of time. So sometimes I choose a Bolt, sometimes I choose a Free Now, etc. And the service is all right. Like it's not always dependable. But then I realize, hey, I'm spending this much money every single day. But I'm not getting any rewards for it. So can I subscribe to a service to optimize my spend, basically, or get some rewards for it? It's the same kind of logic as credit card companies.
It's loyalty. Loyalty is what picks it up. So the onboarding from Google would be relatively cheap. And so because of the constant spend. All right.
Yeah. And the user also wins in this because the user just wants to optimize their spend.
And then they end up on the Google, not on the Google anymore. They end up on the Uber system because they're subscribed to it. And,
exactly.
Yeah.
And if it means that one day I'm going to spend £1 more, that's a hit that you're willing to take as long as I save £5 in a month. And this is where I think, so this merging of ecosystems or this agentic approach is going to face some kind of resistance. But in a way, I also think it's inevitable that things go in that direction. Because once you have many providers, let's say like Uber gets relegated into an API, or not Uber, let's say Bolt in this case. And Uber wants its interface, but Bolt is an API. That an agentic approach can call. You can do way more complex things with it, and Bolt will be chosen much more often than than Uber. And it'll just become inevitable for Uber to say, okay, I want to take part in that ecosystem as well.
Why? I mean, I catch that jump where, they prefer Bolt, for example, because of what they're just an API. They're white labeled. You probably don't even know Bolt exists.
Exactly. So it's white labeled. It's an API that the agent calls. And let's say you want to do some complex task, right? I want to order a cab to my home, but instead of me, I want to take a package, deliver it somewhere else, and then pick up someone at that address and drop them someone. So it's in an Uber world, that's a three-stop journey. In an agentic world, that's like a language query, Basically, I'm trying to optimize two things. And then all that Bolt gets tasked to do is go from point A to point B and then point B to point C. It doesn't know anything beyond that. So I think the moment you expose a service to handle, let's say, the cognition at a larger layer and then just get relegated to do particular tasks, it will start being used for those tasks quite often. And just because Uber doesn't provide that integration, it loses out on that entire stream of business. And as things get more complex at a larger level, I think, so let's say there's something like this, right? Tell my Google device this morning, hey, I have a concert to go to at 10 p.m. Based on the traffic, just make sure that I get there by 9:30 p.m. via Bolt. And if I can say that in natural language and it just gets picked up, and then Google tracks the traffic for the day, and says, hey, Prass, I've ordered a cab. Here is your 10-minute reminder. It's going to be here in 10 minutes. It's downstairs to pick you up. I think Uber just loses out on that.
Got it. So what you got there is a use case where it's mostly, the workflow is quite complex, involves several things, and which Bolt is part of, which Uber cannot handle. And hence, because you've given the example where they're no longer on Google Maps anymore, they lose out on that. As long as, as long as demand for the services are complex, that's when Uber loses out.
Exactly. And I think things will naturally tend to get more complex, right? Because I have things in my calendar and I have addresses on my calendar, and I'm happy as long as there's an agent that I can trust. I'm happy to offload the task of booking cabs and taking me to places to that agent. And this is where I think Uber will struggle. To compete in this new market, then they'll have to release their own AI and agentic approach, and then they'll fail in that dramatically because they're not great at doing that.
Yep, because their resources are not there for that.
Yeah, and this is coming back to your point of like this agentic approach is kind of like a complex aggregator, a dynamic aggregator based on your request. Works really great where you have multiple ands and ifs and stuff. And I do see the future going in this multiple ands and ifs, at least for consumer-based applications. For business applications, it might be different, but at least for consumer applications, I do see more complex workflows emerging, and therefore more of these tools just become tools and don't become anything else beyond that tool.
Wow. Comes down to a matter of choice.
Matter of choice, yeah. And I could very well see an operating system in the future which is mostly agentic, similar to the one in Her, where we talked about browser, but just take that a level further into the entire operating system and say, hey, I want to find this document that I got as a contract yesterday, and I want to find out if there are any special clauses in that contract that I need to be aware of, and then please do some research, find out whether these clauses are valid clauses, and give me some information about that. Like only last week, I got a rental contract. And the first thing I did was sent my original contract, sent my renewal contract to ChatGPT, and I say, hey, is my renewal aligned with my original contract, or am I going to sign myself into something that I don't want to sign myself into? That simple workflow involved, it gave me the clauses, but then I had to go and Google some of these clauses and then actually understand the implications of them. So imagine that complexity emerging where it knows exactly where my contracts are based on my download history or something, or based on indexing all these documents. It knows that it's a renewal contract. And then it's able to feed that into an LLM. It's able to feed that downstream from an LLM to a search engine, and it's able to get some other information. And let's say it's a new apartment and I need to do a viewing. It arranges an Uber for me to get me there and puts a calendar appointment and emails the real estate agent saying that, hey, this is the slot I picked. Waits for their reply, confirms that, makes sure that my calendar appointment is confirmed, and then moves forward from that. And I think a couple of these workflows are not going to be instant, right? They're going to be long running. So it might just get paused while I wait for a response from the realtor. And then once the response comes in, continues based on the response to go in a certain direction. So I do think operating systems themselves, like your desktop app, will start going in that direction.
You, my friend, have, I think, that innate trust of allowing AI to handle all that, to understand all the context of which things are popping up as they pull out new information. They're like, okay, this new context came, and so I will do those things. As in, the AI understands your intent and uses that as a guiding point.
I think the key thing over there for me to develop that trust would be in how transparent the whole workflow is.
Of course.
there is an inner element of how much I trust an LLM with the answer it gives. Like, has it picked the right contracts for the renewal and the original contract? So that is a slight innate trust. But then the entire workflow, making sure that I know every next step that it's going to do is going to be quite integral to making this work.
Yep. One way to build that trust is really just to, over time, you'll see its outcomes and its results. And the less you query further into that, the transparency is there for you to query, right? To look into if there's any mistakes. The less mistakes, the more you trust it. And then the more you let it go.
Yeah, and this has historically been the issue with LLMs, right? Like the LLMs themselves are not very transparent. So you ask ChatGPT a question, it's not going to tell you why it came up with the answer. Like, I'm talking about the simpler models, right? It's going to spurt out information, and in that process, it could have hallucinated. Sure. So there, developing that trust is going to be inherently hard because today's architectures do not allow for that information to be retrieved from the LLMs. However, when you have a multi-LLM workflow, like an agentic approach, a chain of thought approach, there you can at least see the output of one model and how it's feeding to the next model or the next tool that appears. So this is what happens in chain of thought reasoning. Like, let's say I ask it a complex question about something about PhD level machine learning. It's able to do some initial search. Okay, this is the output of the search. Then it's able to say that, hey, these are the 5 papers that I believe are going to be useful. Sure, I see the 5 papers. These are what I distilled from the 5 papers. See that. How it distilled what it distilled is still hidden behind the scenes. But at least I see the larger
results.
steps.
See every step of the way. Yep.
And I think that interpretability is key. Ideally, I want full interpretability. I need to know exactly how an LLM is answering a certain question. But in the lack of that, at least knowing how a collection of LLMs are answering some questions, I think that's useful.
Wow.
And I think that's the key to like generating trust, let's say.
I can see that. I can totally see that. Wow, this has been very insightful.
Very insightful for me as well. Just went to drink a cup of water, actually.
No worries.
On that note, shall we call it for this podcast episode? So it was all about SaaS today, and whether SaaS will die or whether the SaaS will live. Well, what's your final take on this?
Well, as I believe, as long as specialism and verticalism is needed, as long as there's always new ideas cropping up that needs, understanding, it will still stay. Because AI can only take advantage of things that are fully commoditized and standard out before. Yeah. It will. It's not dead.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Likewise, I don't think SaaS is dead, and I think verticalism still exists, and I think new verticals will emerge given the tooling that we have right now. So,
Yep.
SaaS is not dead, folks. On that note, goodbye.
Goodbye, guys.